Howdy y'all. Today we're going to be doing the primitive man lesson in Maya. So this is probably going to be a lot of y'all's first time using Maya. So just take extra care to kind of pay attention to what keybinds I'm telling you to do. Make sure you guys are kind of paying attention to that 3D space and all that stuff. I'll point a couple of things out as we go along that you need to pay attention to. Now the Maya icon is right down here. Um, at the beginning of the year, I kind of told you guys to add it. If not, you just kind of go over here to your start menu, all apps, and then it's under Autodesk Maya, and then you have Maya 2023. So I'm going to open it up. It'll be this screen right here. It might or might not be full screen by default. You just click on your full screen, make it big. And we're going to pay attention to this left-hand side with this new and this open. We're just going to hit new because we want a new scene. Now this pulls up our Maya UI right here, and we're ready to jump right in. So in my workspace right here, I'm going to want to go up to my poly modeling shelf, and I'm going to left click on this orange sphere right here. We're going to make a primitive man, and we're going to start with the head. So I'm going to make the head, and you can see it represented in our 3D workspace right here. As you guys can see, I'm kind of moving in and out, rotating. So how I'm doing this is pretty simple. You're going to use that Alt key on your keyboard. So I'm going to hold it down. I prefer to use left Alt. And then I hold it down, and you use your left mouse button while holding left Alt to rotate. You'll see my cursor change to that rotation. You can hold left Alt and right mouse button to zoom in and out. And then you have this middle mouse button, which is your scroll wheel. You can typically click it, and that's also known as middle mouse button, or MMB. So you hold left Alt, middle mouse button, and you can pan around the screen. And you use that to navigate this three-dimensional space. So I've made my head, and I'm going to go look at my outliner, and this is where you can see what we've made be represented. So I have it selected, so it's glowing green, and then you can see it's selected over here in the outliner. These are linked. If I left click into the empty void, I call this the void because it's empty and it's a void. You can see it deselects it in both the outliner and here. So I'm going to grab it in the outliner, and you can see it grabs it. All I do is left click on it. It's currently called pSphere 1. It's very important to name your things very early on, so that way if you ever duplicate them or you need to refer to it later, you can quickly find it in the outliner and you kind of know what you're looking at. I'm going to double left click on the words pSphere 1, and I'm just going to call it my head of my character. Now, later on, I'll kind of get into naming conventions and stuff as they pop up. For this instance right here, I'm just going to leave it as head, or actually, I'm just going to call it head space GEO for geometry. So that way you know this is head geometry. And we'll just get into good habits now. What I'm going to do is I'm going to move the head up in space to build a primitive man. So I want to kind of drag the head up to be the top. When I do stuff like this, you can see this kind of grid right here. The grid is just a reference. It doesn't really mean anything. The center point, if I move this out of the way, right here is where 0 is. So this is 0, 0, 0 on my grid. So you can see I move this guy to the side. Translate X moves. If I undo it, is it 0, 0, 0. So that's where 0 is. That's all the grid's really there for, is it shows you that 0 plane all the way to the 0 point, so that way you know where a floor could be. And floor is just relative. I like using it as a floor, but you don't have to. It's just a suggestion. Now, you see I have these stuff right here, so I'm going to go back to my Q tool, and I'll kind of show you what the tools look like right here. These align with Q, W, E, and R on your keyboard. And so I'll either tell you hotkeys or I'll click the buttons. For Maya, I prefer to use hotkeys a lot. So I'm going to tell you the hotkeys, but you can see over here it selects different parts of the toolbar. So you know exactly what you're looking at, because you have Q, or your select, W, which is your move, E, which is your rotate, and then R, which is your scale. So select lets you select things. You don't have this widget in the way. W is your move tool, so it lets you move stuff around. E is rotate, and then R is scale. You'll notice I called it a widget. This is what lets you manipulate your tool. You need to get in the habit of manipulating your tool in Maya is you have to select them individually in the sense of like you have to move it and then you can rotate it and then you can scale it. Each of these actions has to be done separately and deliberately. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to use the widget. For the move tool, there's there's three ways to interact with the move tool. The most important part to kind of understand with the move tool is you want to keep it on the lines right here. So you can see I grabbed one of the lines. This one's pointing up. Let me grab this right here so we can see. You have this green line. This is typically your y-axis. Red is X and Z is blue. When you left click and drag on one of these widgets or these lines or arrows, I'll refer to them as any of those things, is you can see I'm moving my cursor side to side, but this ball or sphere is only moving up and down. It is not moving anywhere else because it is constrained to that line. So imagine this line is just like stuck through the center of your object and it's on a rail. It cannot go left or right. It can only go up and down in this kind of mode. I'm going to zero this out real quick. All right. And then you can see it works for each of the arrows. It kind of constrains it to that location. Now, I understand using these lines can kind of get tedious if you're like, okay, I need to move it over and then up and then towards me a little bit and then over here. Like, that can get annoying. So, fortunately, Autodesk thought of this. And between the two lines or arrows right here, you'll be able to see a square. When you left click and drag this square, you'll notice these two lines highlight. And that lets you drag around. You'll notice I'm moving instead of like on a line or a rod, it's like more like I'm moving on a sheet of paper. So I can move up and down, left and right, but it is not moving front to back. It's only moving up and down, side to side. We can confirm this with our eyes, but in a three-dimensional space like this, your eyes can deceive you. Where if you leave your workspace in one orientation like this, it'll eventually become like an MC Escher painting where it looks great, but the moment you break perspective, it'll look awful because everything's not where you thought it was. So to combat that, you always want to make sure you're rotating around your stuff, and you pay attention over here to your channel box. So I can tell what I have selected because there's these tabs on the right hand side right here. So you can see channel box, layer editor, attribute editor, modeling toolkit. It's on this very right hand side. It lets you edit a lot of the stuff independent of like moving it. So you can see moving it does do things. So where I'm moving in the z-axis, so my z number right here is changing. But I can also just edit it by left clicking on it. I like to use my number keys a lot, but you can also use the key number row on your keyboard, whichever one you prefer. And you can zero it out. Now you'll notice, and this is a very important distinction because it'll get annoying, as I zeroed it out, but I used the enter key on my number pad. You'll notice in the channel box, it's still letting you edit whatever you want to edit. But if you use the enter key on the main body of your keyboard next to all your letters, it'll exit. So that way you can just hit 0, enter, 0, enter, if you just want to not be making any other edits. So that's a little fun tidbit that'll help you guys out when we're animating. But you can also edit right here. You can left click and drag to select multiple. Excuse me. You can left click and drag to select multiple of these so you can zero everything out all at one time. It's a sphere, so it's not going to show rotation. But, you know, if I wanted to move this up exactly 10 units in the y-axis, it is now up exactly 10 units in the y-axis. I think I'm going to change it to 12. And then my head has been raised. So you can use the move tool to do this, or you can just type it in to move the head up there. What I'm going to do is I'm going to delay introducing the rotate and then the scale tool because we're going to be using them in just a moment. So we're going to use them. We're going to start giving our character a torso because right now we just have a floating head. So we want to start adding a body. So what I like to do is I'm going to start with a cube. So you can kind of go up to this poly modeling shelf. These are called shelves right here. It says poly modeling, and we're just going to open up the shelf and we're going to left click on this cube right here. So I left clicked on the cube. It gives me a P cube 1. Since I already know what I'm going to do with it, I'm going to name it first thing so I don't forget. I'm going to double click on it and I'm just going to call it torso. And then when I'm going to add a space GEO and hit return on my keyboard. Also, I say return, it's enter. Return is the enter key on the main body of your keys. That's what Mac calls it. I used to teach a lot of Mac, so we call it return. So I have torso geo. You'll notice after I hit my return key that it added that underline right there for us. Maya does not like spaces in the names of anything. So if I was to add a space at the end and hit return, well, it deletes it. Let me just add something at the end. I'll add torso geo. And you see it adds a underscore there for us. It does that automatically for certain parts of Maya. Other parts of Maya, you'll have to add it yourself. And if it's not letting you hit enter or return on a name, it's probably because you have a space in there somewhere, and Maya does not like spaces. So I've called this torso. I'm going to use my move tool with W, and that's W on my keyboard, to drag it up into what I think would be a good relative position. I'm going to hold left alt, left mouse button, rotate around, make sure it's in line. I haven't moved forwards or sideways, so it should be in line. And then I'm going to use my scale tool for this. So I'm going to hit R on my keyboard for scale. I know it's not very intuitive, but R on your keyboard for scale. You can also see the tool right here. And we're going to scale it out. From here, you guys get to decide a couple of things. We didn't really have to decide what would be the front of our character because a sphere doesn't really have a front or a side unless we tell it to. So here we get to make our decision. So you could do it one of two ways. Typically, I like to kind of use the Z axis, the blue one, as the front. You can also use this little cube up here as a guideline. So you can see it says front, so we can use that as our front. You don't have to follow that cube. You can make this your front, that your front, that your front. Whatever you want. I like to use it sometimes, but I typically use the Z axis as my front. I'm going to grab the red cube and I'm going to pull it to the side. Here we can kind of just pull it out and you see it's expanding only in one axis. And I think that looks pretty good. So it's at 6.399. You guys can leave it at that, or if you like a little bit more round numbers, 6.4. Whatever you desire. So I'm going to actually, I'll move it in a smidge to make it look a little bit better to me. So I kind of like how that looks. I'm going to leave it there. For your guys' torso, you can make it whatever width you want. And I have my first torso made. Now I'm going to mess the torso up just a little bit to show you the different aspects of the scale tool. It's because as you can see, it works the same way with the cubes that kind of point in straight lines. You can see it only affects one axis at a time. And you can use this to take a very basic cube and change its shape and properties a lot. And then you also have kind of the two axes as well, so it can kind of scale in two directions at one time. You'll notice as I'm scaling it, it says a consistent thickness right here. So that kind of changes how the wall, or well, I say wall, but the little torso bit looks after a while. You'll notice me going back in time. I just use Control Z to go back. I think Maya has about 25, 50 undos until it stops. So just want to keep that in mind. It will eventually stop letting you undo. I think it's about 50 undos. But that's just something to keep in mind. Now, the important part about the torso geo is you'll see this little transparent, or not transparent, but this light blue cube in the middle. This one's very important because this is a proportional scale. It'll scale all three axes at the same time. So that means I can make this kind of proportional torso bit bigger, and it stays proportional, but it's scaled up. So it's very cool to use. Like maybe you model something like a chair and it doesn't fit the rest of your scene. Well, that's what you would use. You would scale it up till it fits and it stays all proportional and nice looking. And that's kind of our torso and scale tool. What I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate the torso 2 more times, and then I'm going to add a pair of hips for my character. How I do this is Maya's a little bit different. I'm going to hit W because I'm just going to move it down. Maya's pretty cool as it lets you duplicate things. It also lets you copy and paste. You do not copy and paste in Maya. I will tell you this. You use copy and paste to move between scenes in Maya, but you don't use it to copy and paste objects. So I call this geo, but these are also known as objects. You don't copy and paste objects in the same Maya scene. And this whole thing is called a Maya scene, and I'll kind of go over that when we get closer to the end when we save it. But this is called a Maya scene, and you do not copy and paste within the same Maya scene. You duplicate. So duplicate is very easy. You just hit Control D to duplicate. And that duplicates your selected object, and you can have any number of objects selected and duplicate all of them at the same time with Control D, or you can only have one object selected and use Control D to duplicate it. Now, what you're going to do is we have duplicated it. One thing you kind of want to notice is it looks very similar in the 3D workspace because it duplicates over the exact same coordinates. So you always want to make sure you're watching your outliner as well, because you can see we have a torso geo 1, but it only looks like we only have one piece of torso here. So that means we just want to grab torso geo 1, move it down. So I'm going to duplicate it one more time, drag it down. So I kind of have the 3 bits of my torso. And I just hit Control D to duplicate. So I Control D, use W, move it down as needed. I'm going to hit R for my scale tool. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to scale it in just a little bit proportionally, so it like kind of tapers a bit. I'll probably taper it with the Z right here, and then the red, which is my X. And I'm just going to do that for both of my objects, and maybe a little bit of the Y to make it look a little prettier. All right, and then I kind of got my torso right here. I need to give my character a pair of hips. I'm going to grab the very bottom one, Control D to duplicate, W for my move tool. I'm going to grab, this looks yellow, but it's actually green. If I click on another line, you can see it goes back to green. I'll either call it the color or the axis it's on. So in this case, Y. But yellow just means last tool selected, and I'm going to move it down. And I'm going to use R for my scale tool, drag it back out just a little bit, nudge it back down with my move tool. You can see that this is torso 3 right here, and I just have nudged it down a bit to make it look a little bit better in its position here. So I'll use the scale tool, pull it back out just a little bit. And then I'm going to double click on it with my left mouse button, and I'm just going to call this my hips. So when I left click on each of them, it'll highlight. So you can see I have head, torso, torso geo 1, torso geo 2, and then my hips right here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start making my leg first. When you make your character's legs, you just want to focus on one side first, because what we're going to do is we're going to use the power of duplication to help us out here, where we're going to make one leg, make a group of it, and then duplicate it over. So we get our other leg, and then we can duplicate it up and even make it our arm. So that way we just, save ourselves some time. When you're working with a program like Maya, think about what it can do for you and how you can use your time effectively within it. And it'll work wonders for you. I'll drag this out just a little bit. So I'm just tweaking this a bit. You guys can tweak it, not tweak it. Once again, it's your primitive man. I just want to see the basic shapes that you guys make. So I have my hips, and then what I'm going to do is move them in just a little bit, and I will grab my sphere right here. I'm going to left click on it one time, make a new sphere. I'm going to hit R for my scale tool. I'm going to grab that middle square or cube right there, shrink it down. Then I'm going to hit W for my move tool. I'm going to use the blue square to drag it up and over. So that way it moves in two axes at one time. It looks like it's lined up nicely. And then I will use this to kind of rebase my character's hips. So they're a little bit inside the arm here. There we go. And I'm going to call this my left hip. And then I guess I'll rename hips. Yeah, no, I'll just leave them. So I have my hips for like my center, and then I'll have left hip right here for my leg. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to grab this guy right here. And what I like to do is I like to reuse assets. So I'm going to left click that bottom hip right here. I'm going to Control D to duplicate it. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to pay attention to this center, because the center is where it's going to pivot right here, the middle of the widget. So I'm going to grab my square, I'm going to drag it down, and I'm going to eyeball it right about here where I think it's the middle, where I'm going to go hit E for my rotate tool. It's the first time we're using this tool. So E is your rotate tool. And then you can see some of the similar stuff we've seen before with the other tools, where you have the different colored rings which show you which axis you're rotating in, so you can pay attention to the channel blocks. As I rotate, and you'll see I'm actually rotating all three here. That's kind of bad. What we want to do is we want to make sure we're only rotating in one axis at a time. And that one's rotating in all three because we're moving it with all three, but we just want to be careful about that because depending on how you rotate, it can really affect what is moving on your object. And so these lines right here kind of constrain it to whatever the line is. So it keeps everything kind of moving nicely. You'll see I rotated it about 90 degrees flat right here. So I'm just going to make sure I can type a nice 90 there. And I'll make sure my Y is a 0 for now. I'm going to do the same thing in this up and down direction where I can rotate it up and down. You can eyeball it if you want. You can double check right here. You'll see that this is a negative 90, so I want to make sure I do my negative 90. It does use positive and negative numbers here. It just references which way your object's rotating. So you can do that 90 right there, or the other way you can rotate is you can hold the J key. You can use the J key as in John, and what you do is while you hold the J key first on your keyboard, and then when you left click and drag, it'll rotate in 15-degree increments, which gives you a lot of precise control about how you rotate your object. You are also able to kind of grab anywhere in the middle here between the lines and rotate freely. That's something that could be useful, could not be useful. Same kind of thing with this blue one. It does a similar job there of rotating it freely. So this could be helpful in some instances. It could also be terribly annoying in other instances. So it's just something to think about when you're moving your objects around and rotating them. I'm going to use my scale tool. I'm going to shrink it in this square right here between blue and green. And I'll shrink red just a little bit because I want to give myself enough room to finish the leg. So I'll finish the leg first before I start renaming everything, and then I'll kind of go from there. I line it up with the move tool. I'm going to reuse my hip, so I'm going to duplicate it, drag it down, grab this guy, duplicate it, drag it down, and then I'll have to scale it just a little bit so it'll fit. And then I'll go through and rename it. So this is my left thigh. This is my left knee. And this is my left shin. And then I've labeled the parts of my leg right here. I do L for left. You can do it before or after whatever you type. It's up to you guys. You can type out left if you want. I use L and R. And I either put them in the front or the back depending on how I decide to name that day. Alright, and then what I'll do is I'll grab my shin, and then I will Control D to duplicate it, use E for rotate. I'm going to hold J, rotate along the inline line right here, which in my case is blue or X. Go to W, and kind of just move it in front, and then use my R to scale it. Maybe I'll scale a little bit flat, scale a little bit forwards, and hit W, and put it in front. So now I have a foot. And I'll just call this my left foot right there. And then I have my left leg. So I had mentioned I was going to group it, and then what I was going to do is duplicate it. So what we do here is we can group things. There's a couple of different ways you can go about this. You can left click and drag to make a selection box in the 3D viewport right here. Let go. Make sure you're selecting only the things you want to select within this dotted box. Let go, and it selects it. You can see it's all highlighted in the outliner. The drawback to using this dotted box is it's like, imagine a tunnel is made and it's like a laser that goes on forever. So everything behind whatever you're selecting will be selected as well. Even if like the barest little corner of it, like right here, is selected, it highlights that as well. So this is just something that you can use, but just be aware of the drawbacks. If you have a whole scene like we had walls behind our character, we would accidentally be grabbing those walls as well. You can hold shift and left click on objects to select them and deselect them as necessary. So you can do that to select your objects if you're looking at them in the scene. You can go to your outliner, and provided you've named your stuff, you know what you need to grab. So you can start at the top, left click and drag to select everything. So all I did, left click and drag. You can also do it up. You can hold control and left click on everything that you need. Or you can do a left click at the top, hold shift, left click the bottom of your selection, and grab everything between those 2 points. It works the other way as well. However you select it, you just want to select your left leg. And then we're going to use Control G on our keyboard to group. We should be able to use Edit Group as well right here. So Control G, you can see the hotkey. So the Edit menu, Group. When we left click on that or hit Control G on our keyboard, you'll notice our widget has moved and it has changed how our selection looks. Because if we look at our old selection, you can see we had one green and a bunch of other white objects. So what that kind of meant is if I was to rotate everything, you'll see they rotate independent of each other. But if I was to edit group them, and I was to rotate them, they rotate around the new pivot. So we need to fix that pivot because we want to move it, and moving things in relation to a pivot down here is quite honestly annoying. So what we're going to go do is we're going to go to our modify menu, and we're going to center our pivot. So now our pivot is centered right here. So now this kind of lets us rotate a little bit easier and position our group a little bit easier. What I'm going to do is I'm going to double click on this group 1 that I had made, and I'm just going to call this my left leg. And I ended that a little too early, and I'm going to add GRP for group. I like to label things very specifically. So we have our stuff labeled geo, we have our group labeled group, and we have all this stuff right here. If you wanted to, you could go through and add geo for everything if you wanted. As I said earlier, I'll use it interchangeably depending on what I'm doing. But the reason we're very specific about our names is Maya, everything talks to everything. So you might have a left leg like material, and then you try to label your group left leg. Well, in the back end, Maya sees each other, or sees both of those things, and it won't let you name it left leg. It'll be like left leg 1. So in case that ever happens, that's probably what's going on. So we have our left leg group. I'm going to control D because not only can you duplicate objects, you can duplicate a whole bunch of stuff like groups. I'm going to duplicate my group. We'll have it right here. And you can see we have everything right there. What I like to do is I like to go through and change my L's with R's so I know exactly what I'm looking at. Now they're in different groups, so this time they're not talking to each other, so you can have two different left foot geos. But when I put them together, it kind of gets upset. As you can see, it adds the one. How I'm moving stuff around right here, because you can see I'm dragging stuff from one group to the other, is you can reorganize your outliner right here by using your middle mouse button, left clicking, and dragging. So when you put an object into another object like I did right here, this is called parenting. It's very different from a group. It works very differently from a group. It exists. I just want you to know it exists. And then you can also left click and drag it up. And when you see that dotted line, you let go. It just moves it where it needs to go. So you can move objects between groups this way. Now, one thing you might have noticed about your outliner is it's two-dimensional. It only goes up and down, and you only get these little trees. So that's why groups are very important, because it lets you minimize things while keeping them organized. I'm going to rename everything real quickly, and then I will be right back. And a quick tip to rename everything is I'll left click and drag to select it all. You can do modify, search and replace, and you can search for a capital L, and then you can replace it with R. I will change it to selected. I will replace, and it changes all the names for me without having to do it on your own. Kind of makes your life a little bit easier. And then now I've made my two legs for my character. I am going to steal a leg by duplicating it with Control D. And then I am just going to drag it up to my arm. And I can start reorganizing things after I rename them. And I have an arm. So if you're very kind of creative with your thinking, you can go through and reorganize stuff to your convenience. And it makes your life a little bit easier. So I'm just using a combination of the move tool and the scale tool to kind of arrange things. So I'm going to arrange them first. I'm also using rotate. I'm going to rearrange them first, and then I'll go rename them. So all I did is I shrunk the, I guess this would be your bicep. I'll just call it the bicep. And then you have your forearm right here. This will be your elbow. This will be your shoulder. I'm going to steal an elbow with Control D to duplicate it. I'm going to use my move tool to move it down. And this will be my palm. Actually, no, I don't want to use that. Oh, see how I selected multiple things? I'll undo it, grab it, and delete it. Is I'll just use this guy, and we'll see what we get. So I'll straighten it out. Move it up. And then I'll shrink it to the front. No, I want the sphere. All I'm doing is moving and shrinking this, pretending I'm going to have a sphere in front. So I'm going to reseal my sphere, move it down, shrink it just a bit, pull it down, pull this one down, and then all you can see is I rotated it forward and then thinned it out with R for my rotate. I'm going to Control D to duplicate it, and then I will rotate it a little bit more, shrink it in, not as much, just a little bit, because your fingers do taper, so that's kind of what I'm emulating here. And then I'll have that, and then if you really want to, you could probably do a very thin tip, maybe, right there. I would probably shrink this. And there we go. We kind of have a representation of the front of our hand. I'm going to steal this torso piece, or the palm piece right here. I'm going to shrink it real thin. I'm just going to move it over to the side. Rotate it just a little bit like that. Move it forwards. And then now we kind of have a blocky hand for our character right here. And then now I get to do the fun part of renaming everything since I saved that for last. This is still my left arm, so I'm going to call it my left arm. Clean up my names. And then this will be, I'll just left click on stuff so I know what I'm doing. So this will be my left shoulder, left bicep, elbow right here, forearm, and then we'll have our left palm, our left thumb, and then what I'll do right here is I'll just call this my left finger 1. I'll double click to copy it, go down here, double click, Control V, Control C to copy, Control V to paste. And see, since you already have a 1 here, I can click and it'll automatically give me the 2. So I can use that to save me a little bit of time. And I'll do that to kind of go through and rename everything for my arm group. And then you can go through and maybe shrink things just a little bit if you want to kind of give a different version of definition. I'll grab my arm group, Control D to duplicate it, W, move it over, and then all I have to do to fix my arm is just grab this guy and slide it over, rotate it the other way, something like that. And then now my primitive man is ready to go. Oh, other than renaming. I have to rename it real quick. So let's rename it, and I'll do the same thing I just showed you with I select everything. So left click at the top, hold shift, left click at the bottom, modify, left click top, bottom, modify, search and replace names, and then it saves the last thing. So L for R, apply. Looking pretty good. I'll delete this extra one just because I want it to look nice and pretty. And then my primitive man is good to go. So we're going to save it so we can save our progress. So all we're going to do is we're going to hit File, Save Scene As. So this will save your scene as, and by default it puts it in Documents, Maya, Projects, Default Scenes. What we want to do is we just want to go to our Documents folder right here. So this is a save folder, and it's very similar to the one that we've used for Photoshop. It'll just look different because they give it a slightly different UI. You still have your folder bookmarks. Documents is still available here. That's all we really need. We'll use the Maya folder that we have, so we'll double click into Maya, and then we can just call it our primitive man. So I would type your last name, shift to underscore, and then you're going to type primitive man. And we're going to add scene at the end because this is a Maya scene. So scenes are what Maya calls these spaces we're working in. So I like to call it scenes so I know what it is I'm looking at, because there's a whole bunch of other things you can save out of Maya. So it's in your best interest to label your things so you know what you're looking at. So I'm going to call mine Maya scene, and I'm going to change from Maya binary to ASCII for this one. There's two different types. Once you save something as either of these types, it's kind of set in stone. You can't change it. I believe binary is the compressed. ASCII is like plain text where you can edit stuff in a text editor. That's the difference. And then all I'm going to do is change it to my ASCII. I'll hit Save As. You can see at the very top of our window, we now see our last name primitive man scene.ma. .ma is a Maya scene file. And we're good to go. This is the end of part 1.